In my previous life, Chen Wei pushed me toward that frozen lake, and I jumped in to save him without hesitation. The icy water rushed into my lungs as I dragged his unconscious body to shore, my own strength failing with every stroke. "Please, someone help us!" I screamed until my voice gave out. But by the time the paramedics arrived, hypothermia had already claimed half my life. I spent 3 weeks in intensive care, my body fighting to recover from the damage. Chen Wei visited every day, holding my hand and whispering how sorry he was, how he'd make it up to me. "You saved my life," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I'll never forget what you did for me." I believed him. How foolish I was. It wasn't until I was finally discharged that I discovered the truth. Chen Wei had left his phone in my hospital bag by mistake, and when it buzzed with notifications, I saw them. Dozens of messages between him and Lin Xiaoyue, my former roommate, my supposed friend. The messages went back months, long before the accident. "Baby, when is she finally getting out of the hospital? I'm tired of pretending to care." Lin Xiaoyue's words burned into my retinas. "Soon, don't worry. Once she's recovered, I'll break up with her gently. She did save my life after all." Chen Wei's response made my blood freeze colder than that lake ever had. But it was Lin Xiaoyue's next message that shattered what remained of my naive heart. "LOL, she's so pathetic. Did she really think you loved her? You were only with her for her family's money, and now she's proven she'll literally die for you. What an idiot." Chen Wei's reply. "I know, right? But her parents have been so generous with the medical bills and everything. Let's milk this a little longer." My hands shook as I scrolled through weeks of their cruel laughter at my expense. Every tender moment I thought we'd shared during my recovery had been a lie. Every "I love you" had been a performance for an audience of one. Me, the fool who'd nearly died for someone who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM. I confronted them that very day. Chen Wei had the audacity to try to deny it at first, claiming the messages were taken out of context. But when Lin Xiaoyue showed up and saw me holding his phone, she dropped all pretense. "Oh, grow up," she sneered, her pretty face twisting into something ugly. "Did you seriously think someone like Chen Wei would choose someone like you? I mean, look at yourself. You're plain, boring, and the only interesting thing about you is your family's bank account." Chen Wei didn't defend me. He just stood there, looking annoyed that his scheme had been exposed. "Look, we didn't plan for this to happen," he said finally. "But Lin Xiaoyue and we're in love. Real love. Not whatever this was." "This," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This was me nearly dying for you." "And I'm grateful," he said coldly. "But gratitude isn't love." The next few months were a nightmare. Chen Wei moved in with Lin Xiaoyue almost immediately, and they flaunted their relationship around campus like they were celebrating. My so-called friends took sides, and most chose theirs. After all, they were the fun couple, while I was just the girl who got dumped after a heroic gesture gone wrong. My health never fully recovered from the hypothermia. I developed chronic respiratory problems that made it hard to concentrate on my studies. My grades slipped, and with them, my scholarship opportunities. Meanwhile, Chen Wei and Lin Xiaoyue thrived, using the social capital from their tragic love story to network and build their futures. I graduated, barely, and struggled to find decent work. The medical bills from my extended hospital stay had drained my family's savings, the very money Chen Wei had been after all along. My parents aged years in months, watching their daughter's life fall apart while the boy she'd saved lived his best life with another woman. I spent my 20s working dead-end jobs, my dreams buried under debt and poor health. I watched from afar as Chen Wei and Lin Xiaoyue got engaged, started successful careers, bought a house. They looked so happy in their social media posts, their smiles bright and carefree. They'd built their happiness on the foundation of my destroyed life, and they didn't seem to lose a single night's sleep over it. At 28, my damaged lungs finally gave out completely. I died alone in a hospital room, drowning in my own fluid, just like I'd nearly drowned in that lake a decade earlier. My last thought was bitter and sharp. I saved the wrong person. But then I opened my eyes, and I was 20 again. I was sitting in the passenger seat of Chen Wei's car, Lin Xiaoyue giggling in the back seat as she pointed out the window at Frost Lake. The digital clock on the dashboard read 3:47 p.m. December 15th. I knew this moment with crystal clarity. In exactly 20 minutes, Chen Wei would accidentally fall through the ice during a romantic photo session with Lin Xiaoyue, and I would jump in to save him without thinking. Not this time. This time, I'm not saving anyone but myself. Chen Wei's final gambit came on a rainy Thursday in late March. I was walking across campus after my statistics seminar when I heard someone calling my name. I turned to see Chen Wei jogging toward me, his clothes disheveled and his face desperate in a way that might have broken my heart in my previous life. "Please," he said, slightly out of breath. "Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. Gone was the confident, charming boy who'd once manipulated me so easily. This version of Chen Wei was thin and hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that had seen too many days without washing. His hair was greasy, his shoes had holes in the soles, and there was something manic in his expression that set off every alarm bell in my mind. 5 minutes for what? To explain everything, to make you understand what's really happening here. "I understand perfectly well what's happening here," I said calmly. "You staged an accident to manipulate me into feeling financially responsible for your well-being. When that failed, you tried to destroy my academic reputation and turn our friends against me. Now you're facing the consequences of your choices." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Chen Wei said, his voice cracking. "The lake thing was stupid, I admit that. But it was never meant to hurt you. I needed you to see how much you meant to me. How much I meant to him." Even now, even in his desperation, Chen Wei couldn't admit the truth. He couldn't say that he'd needed my money, not my love, and how exactly was nearly drowning supposed to show me how much I meant to you. "Because you would have saved me," he said, as if it was obvious. "Because you would have risked everything for me, and that would have proven our connection was real." I stared at him, genuinely amazed by the twisted logic. "You wanted me to nearly die to prove I loved you?" "I wanted you to choose me," Chen Wei said desperately. "I wanted you to put me first, the way people do when they really love someone. The way I put you first for 2 years when I paid for your meals, your textbooks, your entertainment, your emergencies, and every other expense you couldn't be bothered to budget for." Chen Wei's face flushed red. "That's different. That was just helping each other. That's what couples do." "No, Chen Wei, that's what I did. You never helped me with anything. You never paid for anything. You never even offered." "Because I didn't have money," he protested. "You knew my family situation. You knew I was struggling. And you knew my family worked hard for their money. But that didn't stop you from treating them like your personal bank." We were standing in the middle of the campus walkway, and other students were starting to stare. Chen Wei seemed to realize this, because he lowered his voice and stepped closer to me. "Look, I know I made mistakes," he said, switching to what I recognized as his conciliation mode. "I know I hurt you, but I'm desperate here. I'm about to lose everything." "Lose what, exactly?" "My housing, my enrollment, my future." His voice was rising again, despite his efforts to stay calm. "The university is threatening to suspend me if I can't pay my outstanding balances. The hospital debt is destroying my credit. I can't even get a job because my reputation is so damaged. And you think this is my responsibility to fix?" "I think you're the only person who can fix it," Chen Wei said, and for a moment his mask slipped entirely. Your parents have money. They've always liked me. If you just explained the situation—" "My parents have never liked you," I interrupted. "They've never even had a real conversation with you, and they certainly don't owe you money for your poor life choices." "But if you told them how serious this is—" "Chen Wei." I kept my voice level and cold. "I'm not going to ask my parents to pay your debts. I'm not going to rescue you from the consequences of your own actions. I'm not going to enable your manipulation anymore." The change in his expression was instantaneous. The pleading desperation vanished, replaced by something ugly and familiar. This was the Chen Wei I'd glimpsed in my previous life, in moments when his patience ran out and his true nature showed through. "You're really going to just watch me destroy myself?" he asked, his voice turning sharp. "After everything we've been through together?" "Yes," I said simply. "I am. Even though you know I could ruin your reputation permanently. Even though I could make sure everyone on this campus knows what kind of person you really are. There it was, the threat I'd been waiting for. In my previous life, this moment had never come because I'd already given him everything he wanted. But now, with his back against the wall and no other options, Chen Wei was finally revealing the weapon he'd been holding in reserve. "What kind of person am I, Chen Wei?" "Cold," he said immediately. "Selfish. Cruel. The kind of person who abandons someone she claims to love when they need her most." "And how exactly would you spread this message about my character?" Chen Wei's eyes lit up with malicious satisfaction. "I could post the whole story online. About how you sat in a warm car while I nearly died. About how you refused to help with my medical bills, even though your family could easily afford it. About how you've been systematically destroying my life out of petty jealousy over Lin Xiaoyue." "You could do that," I agreed. "But I wonder how people would react when they learned the whole story." "What whole story?" I pulled out my phone and found the video of his accident, the same one that had been circulating since December. The story about how you were taking romantic photos with another woman when you fell through the ice. The story about how you planned the whole incident to manipulate me into feeling guilty enough to pay your bills. Chen Wei's face went pale. "You don't have proof of that." "Lin Xiaoyue confessed the entire scheme to me last week. She was very detailed about the planning, the expectations, and the way things went wrong when the ice was thinner than you'd calculated. Xiaoyue wouldn't. Xiaoyue is tired of being asked to solve financial problems she helped create," I said calmly. "She's also tired of dating someone who sees her as a resource rather than a person. Sound familiar?" The silence stretched between us as Chen Wei processed this information. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, trying to determine how much evidence I actually possessed. "Even if that's true," he said finally, "it doesn't change the fact that you're destroying my life out of spite." "I'm not destroying anything," I replied. "I'm simply refusing to prevent you from destroying yourself." "That's the same thing." "No, Chen Wei, it's not. Destroying your life would require me to actively work against you. What I'm doing is choosing not to work for you. There's a significant difference. But you know I'll lose everything." "Yes, and you knew I would nearly die in that lake. But that didn't stop you from planning the incident. You knew my family would suffer financially from paying your bills, but that didn't stop you from expecting their help. You knew spreading rumors about my academic integrity could destroy my future, but that didn't stop you from calling my professors." Each point hit home. Chen Wei's expression cycled through anger, fear, and something that might have been shame before settling back on desperation. "So this is revenge?" he asked. "This is consequences," I corrected. "This is what happens when someone builds their life on manipulating others and then runs out of people willing to be manipulated. I could still ruin you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I could still make sure everyone knows. Everyone already knows, Chen Wei. They know about your pattern of borrowing money without repaying it. They know about your staged accident. They know about your academic sabotage attempts. They know about your victim narrative falling apart under scrutiny. Chen Wei stared at me with something approaching hatred. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've learned from experience. What experience? We've never been through anything like this before. I almost smiled at that. If only he knew how wrong he was. I've learned that people who treat others as resources eventually find themselves alone and resource poor, I said instead. I've learned that manipulation only works as long as the target is willing to be manipulated. And I've learned that the best way to deal with someone who sees you as an ATM is to close your account. The rain was getting heavier, and other students were hurrying past us toward shelter. Chen Wei seemed oblivious to the weather, focused entirely on his last desperate attempt to regain control. "Please," he said, and for a moment he sounded like the boy I'd once thought I loved. "I'm begging you. I know I made mistakes, but I'm sorry. I'll change. I'll be better. Just help me this one time, and I promise things will be different." In my previous life, those words would have broken my resolve. The tears in his eyes, the vulnerability in his voice, the promise of change. It would have been enough to make me call my parents and beg them to save him one more time. But I'd already lived through his version of change. I knew that Chen Wei's idea of being better meant being more subtle about his manipulation, not abandoning it entirely. "No," I said firmly, "I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to ask my parents for money. I'm not going to rescue you from consequences you earned." Chen Wei's mask fell away entirely then, revealing the ugly desperation underneath. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "When I have nothing left to lose, when my life is completely destroyed, you're going to regret not helping me when you had the chance." "Are you threatening me, Chen Wei?" "I'm telling you the truth. People do desperate things when they're desperate. And you're making me very, very desperate." I looked at him, this pathetic, manipulative man-child who thought he could threaten me into subsidizing his lifestyle, and felt nothing but cold contempt. "Chen Wei," I said quietly, "in my experience, people who make threats like that have already lost whatever power they thought they had." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the rain. Behind me, I heard him shout, "This isn't over! You can't just walk away from me!" But I could, and I did, and this time I didn't look back. Chen Wei's threats weren't empty, but they weren't what I'd expected either. Instead of spreading rumors or trying to damage my reputation further, he chose a more public and dramatic approach, a complete emotional breakdown in the middle of the student center during lunch hour. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but Sarah found me in the library afterwards, her eyes wide with shock and something approaching disgust. "You need to hear about what just happened," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Chen Wei just had a complete meltdown in front of half the school." "What kind of meltdown?" "The ugly kind. He was sitting alone at a table, and apparently Lin Xiaoyue walked by with some friends. He called out to her, asking if they could talk, and when she ignored him, he just lost it." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a video someone had posted to the university's anonymous gossip forum. The footage was shaky and the audio was poor, but Chen Wei's voice was unmistakably clear as he shouted across the crowded cafeteria. "You can't just pretend I don't exist, Xiaoyue. After everything we planned together, after everything we did, you're going to act like you don't know me?" In the video, Lin Xiaoyue looked mortified. She tried to keep walking, but Chen Wei stood up and followed her, his voice getting louder and more erratic. "Tell them," he shouted. "Tell them how we planned the lake incident. Tell them how it was supposed to work. Tell them how she," he pointed wildly in a direction off camera, "ruined everything by refusing to play her part. The cafeteria had gone completely silent. Students were pulling out phones, recording the spectacle, while Lin Xiaoyue stood frozen in the middle of the room. "Chen-Wei, please stop," she said, her voice barely audible in the video. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Chen-Wei's laugh was bitter and unhinged. "I'm making a scene? My entire life is falling apart, and you're worried about a scene." That's when the video got truly uncomfortable to watch. Chen-Wei began listing his grievances against Lin Xiaoyue, against me, against our mutual friends, against anyone who'd failed to support him through his crisis. His voice cracked as he talked about losing his apartment, his mounting debts, his academic probation. But the most damaging part came when he started revealing details about their relationship and the staged accident that he clearly thought would generate sympathy for his situation. "We were trying to bring her closer to me," he said, gesturing again toward where I presumably would have been sitting if I'd been there. The lake thing was supposed to make her realize how much she cared about me. But instead of jumping in to save me like a normal girlfriend would, she just sat in the car and called for help like some kind of robot. A murmur went through the crowd. Even from the poor quality video, I could see students exchanging glances, putting pieces together. "And now she's destroying my life out of spite," Chen-Wei continued. "Her family has money. They could help me with the medical bills, but she's convinced them not to, because she's jealous about Xiaoyue and me." "Chen-Wei, stop talking," Lin Xiaoyue pleaded. "You're only making things worse." "Worse?" Chen-Wei's voice rose to a near shriek. "How could things possibly get worse? I have nothing left. No money, no home, no future. And it's all because she refuses to take responsibility for what happened." That's when Ma Dong appeared in the frame, clearly trying to intervene and get Chen-Wei to calm down. But Chen-Wei pushed him away and continued his public confession. "Do you want to know what kind of person she really is?" he demanded of the crowd. "She knew I needed help, and she chose to let me suffer instead. She knew I was desperate, and she decided my desperation was entertaining." The video cut off there, but Sarah filled in the rest. "Security came and escorted him out," she said. "But not before he'd basically confessed to staging the accident and expecting you to pay his bills. The whole thing was recorded by multiple people, and it's already spreading everywhere." I sat back in my chair, absorbing this information. In my previous life, Chen-Wei had been manipulative and calculating, but never desperate enough to self-destruct so publicly. This level of emotional instability was new territory. "How are people reacting?" I asked. "About like you'd expect. People are saying he's clearly unstable, that his version of events makes no sense, and that he basically admitted to trying to manipulate you into a dangerous rescue situation." Sarah scrolled through her phone, showing me comments from the various social media posts about the incident. "Look at this thread," she said. "People are piecing together the timeline and realizing that Chen-Wei's been lying about basically everything." The comments were indeed illuminating. Wait, so he admits they planned the accident to manipulate his girlfriend, but he's angry that she didn't fall for it? He's literally mad that she was smart enough not to jump into a frozen lake? This guy expected his girlfriend's parents to pay his medical bills after he staged an accident with another woman? The audacity is honestly impressive. I feel bad for both girls involved in this. Imagine dating someone this manipulative. Actually, I don't feel bad for the other girl if she helped plan the accident, but the girlfriend did the right thing staying in the car. This is the same guy who's been spreading rumors about academic cheating, right? What a mess. One comment thread caught my attention. "My friend works at the hospital. Chen-Wei's been calling repeatedly trying to get them to contact his ex-girlfriend about the bills. They told him multiple times that patients are responsible for their own debt, but he kept insisting that she was financially responsible for his care. The billing department finally had to block his calls." Another. "He borrowed money from me last semester for textbooks and never paid it back. Now I know where that money really went." The picture emerging from the comments was devastating. Chen Wei wasn't just manipulative and entitled, he was genuinely delusional about his relationships with other people and their obligations to him. "There's more," Sarah said. Apparently, after security escorted him out, he went straight to the administration building and tried to file a formal complaint against you for abandonment and emotional abuse. He did what? Yeah. He told the dean's office that you were deliberately sabotaging his education and that your harassment was affecting his mental health and academic performance. I felt a chill of familiar fear. In my previous life, I'd been too emotionally destroyed to defend myself against Chen Wei's manipulation. The idea of him taking his lies to official authority figures was genuinely terrifying. What did they tell him? According to my friend, who works in student services, they listened to his story and then informed him that romantic relationship conflicts aren't grounds for formal academic complaints. When he kept insisting that you were somehow responsible for his financial problems, they suggested he seek counseling through student mental health services. And? He got angry and stormed out, claiming that the administration was in on the conspiracy against him. Sarah showed me another video, this one taken outside the administration building. Chen Wei was ranting at anyone who would listen about corruption, favoritism, and how the university was failing to protect students from emotional terrorism. He's completely lost touch with reality, Sarah observed, like genuinely delusional about what's happening and why. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Chen Wei. They took my phone, but I'm borrowing someone else's. You need to call me immediately. The administration knows about your harassment, and they're opening an investigation. If you don't help me fix this situation, they're going to expel both of us." I showed the message to Sarah, who read it with growing disbelief. "He's threatening you with an investigation that he filed against himself?" she asked. "Apparently. And he thinks they're going to expel you for what exactly? Not paying his bills?" "Chen Wei has never been particularly good at cause and effect," I said, deleting the message. "He's always been more focused on outcomes he wants than methods for achieving them." Another message appeared. "I'm serious. They're asking questions about your family's money and why you won't help with my medical expenses. If you don't call me back in 1 hour, I'm going to tell them about your family's tax situation and how they've been avoiding their responsibilities." Sarah read over my shoulder. "Is he threatening to make up tax crimes?" "Apparently. This is insane. He's literally threatening to file false reports with the authorities because you won't pay his bills." I stared at the messages, feeling something unexpected. Relief. In my previous life, Chen Wei's threats had been subtle and private, designed to manipulate me without creating evidence of his behavior. But this version of Chen Wei, desperate and unhinged, was creating a public record of his delusions and threats. "You know what?" I said, screenshotting the messages. "I think I should take these to student services myself." Really? Chen Wei is threatening to file false reports with multiple authorities because I won't subsidize his lifestyle. That seems like something the administration should know about." Sarah grinned. "Oh, this is going to backfire on him spectacularly." The next morning, I walked into the student services office with printed copies of Chen Wei's threatening messages, links to the videos of his public breakdown, and a calm, factual account of our relationship history. The administrator I spoke with listened with growing concern as I explained the pattern of manipulation, financial exploitation, and escalating threats. "Mr. Chen filed a complaint against you yesterday," she confirmed. "He claimed you were engaging in harassment and emotional abuse. But these messages you're showing me paint a very different picture." "I thought you should have the complete context," I said. "Thank you. This is quite troubling. Mr. Chen's behavior as documented here suggests someone who may need significant mental health support." That afternoon, I received an official email from the university informing me that Chen Wei's complaint against me had been dismissed and that he had been referred to mandatory counseling services. The email also noted that any further contact attempts from Chen Wei should be reported immediately, as he was now prohibited from initiating contact with me. Sarah found me later that evening, practically bouncing with excitement. "You'll never guess what happened," she said. "Chen Wei got himself banned from campus for the rest of the semester." "What?" "After you went to student services, they called him in for a follow-up meeting. Apparently, he came in ranting about conspiracies and corruption again, and when they told him his complaint was dismissed, he completely lost it. Started shouting about how you'd bribed them, how your family had connections, how the whole system was rigged against him." "And they banned him for that?" "They banned him when he threatened to expose the truth by contacting local news stations and filing complaints with the police about financial crimes and educational corruption. The administrator realized he was planning to make false reports to multiple authorities and decided he was a threat to campus safety." I sat down slowly, absorbing this information. Chen Wei had played every card in his hand, made every threat he could think of, and the result was his complete self-destruction. "So he's gone?" "He's gone, and according to the grapevine, his academic standing was already so damaged by missed payments and poor performance that he probably won't be readmitted next semester anyway." That night, I stood at my dorm room window, looking out at the campus Chen Wei could no longer access, thinking about the difference between consequences and revenge. I hadn't destroyed Chen Wei's life. I'd simply refused to prevent him from destroying it himself. In my previous life, I'd enabled his manipulation for so long that I'd never seen what happened when he ran out of victims. Now I knew he'd rather destroy himself than take responsibility for his own choices. Everyone has to pay for their actions. Chen Wei had just discovered that the bill was higher than he'd expected. 6 months later, my life had transformed beyond recognition. I was walking across campus on a crisp September morning, heading to my first day as a graduate teaching assistant, when I saw him. Chen Wei was standing outside the campus coffee shop, looking through the window with the hollow expression of someone who no longer belonged. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind of carefully maintained appearance that spoke of limited resources and careful planning. He'd lost weight, and there was something defeated in the way he carried himself that made him almost unrecognizable from the confident manipulator I'd once known. I might have walked past without stopping, but something made me pause. Perhaps it was curiosity about how far he'd fallen, or perhaps it was the strange closure of seeing him reduced to exactly what he'd always been beneath the charm. A small, desperate person with delusions of grandeur. He noticed me before I could decide whether to continue walking. Our eyes met through the coffee shop window, and I saw him freeze with recognition. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Chen Wei walked outside, approaching me with hesitant steps. "Hi," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I heard you got into the graduate program. Congratulations." "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. Chen Wei looked like he wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. Up close, I could see the toll the past months had taken on him. His skin was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, and there was a nervous energy about him that suggested someone running on stress and caffeine. "You look good," he said finally. "Happy." I was happy. After Chen Wei's ban from campus, my life had blossomed in ways I'd never experienced in either timeline. My grades had soared without the constant drain of his drama and financial demands. I'd built genuine friendships with classmates who valued my intelligence and integrity. I'd secured a prestigious research assistantship that would fully fund my graduate studies. "I am happy," I said simply. Chen Wei nodded, looking down at his shoes. "I heard you're working with Professor Zhang on economic policy research. That's really impressive. It's rewarding work." Another pause. Chen Wei seemed to be gathering courage for something. "Listen," he said. I know things ended badly between us. Really badly. And I know I said and did things that were wrong. I just wanted you to know that I'm getting help now. Counseling, medication. I'm trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. But he just looked tired and genuinely remorseful, like someone who'd finally seen himself clearly and didn't like what he'd found. That's good, I said. Self-awareness is important. Yeah, Chen Wei laughed bitterly. Turns out I had some pretty serious issues with entitlement and emotional regulation. Who would have thought? The sarcasm was familiar, but it was directed inward now rather than at others. This version of Chen Wei seemed capable of recognizing his own flaws, which was more growth than I'd ever seen from him before. What are you doing now? I asked, genuinely curious. Working, he said. 2 part-time jobs, actually. Delivery driver and night shift at a warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Most of them, anyway. And school. I'm taking a break, trying to get my finances sorted out before I think about going back. Maybe next year, if I can save enough for tuition. Chen Wei was living the life I'd lived in my previous timeline after his manipulation had destroyed my academic opportunities and financial stability. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm glad you're taking responsibility for your situation, I said. Yeah, well, turns out no one else was going to do it for me. He gave me a look that might have been meaningful. Funny how that works. Funny how that works, I agreed. We stood there for another moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Chen Wei seemed to be debating whether to say more, and I found myself curious about what words he might choose. I know I don't have the right to ask this, he said finally, but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? For the lake thing? For the manipulation? For all of it? It was a fair question, and one I'd thought about often during my recovery from our toxic relationship. In my previous life, forgiveness had been impossible because I'd never fully understood what I was forgiving. But in this timeline, with clarity and distance, I could see Chen Wei as what he really was. A broken person who'd tried to fix himself by breaking others. I think forgiveness is less about you and more about me, I said carefully, and I think I've already done the work of letting go of anger. What you do with your life now is your responsibility, not mine. Chen Wei nodded slowly. That's probably the best I could hope for. Probably. For what it's worth, he said. I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry. You deserved better than the way I treated you. Yes, I said simply. I did. There was something liberating about stating that truth so plainly. In my previous life, I'd spent years wondering if maybe I had deserved his treatment, if maybe I'd failed him somehow. But I'd deserved kindness, respect, and honesty. I'd deserved a partner who saw me as a person rather than a resource. I should go, Chen Wei said. I'm sure you have important graduate student things to do. I do, actually. But Chen Wei? He turned back to me, hope flickering in his expression. I hope the counseling helps, I said. I hope you figure out how to have healthy relationships. I hope you build a life you're proud of. Thank you, he said quietly. That means more than you know. I watched him walk away toward the bus stop. This man who'd once controlled so much of my emotional energy, and now controlled none of it. There was something peaceful about the encounter, like the final closing of a book I'd already finished reading. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Coffee before your first TA session? I want to hear all about your research project meeting. I smiled and typed back. On my way. Lots to tell you about. As I walked toward the coffee shop Chen Wei had been looking into so longingly, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. In my previous life, Seeing Chen Wei in such reduced circumstances would have triggered guilt and the old urge to rescue him. But I'd learned something valuable about the difference between compassion and enablement. I could feel sorry for Chen Wei's situation without feeling responsible for fixing it. I could hope for his recovery without participating in it. I could forgive him without forgetting the lessons his manipulation had taught me. Inside the coffee shop, Sarah was waiting at our usual table with 2 cups of my favorite tea. She was scrolling through her phone, but looked up with a bright smile when she saw me. "How are you feeling about your first day as a TA?" she asked. "Nervous? Excited?" "Excited," I said, settling into my chair. "It feels like the beginning of something important." "It is the beginning of something important. You're going to be amazing at this." Sarah had been one of the unexpected gifts of my rebirth timeline, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared academic interests, rather than the complicated dynamics of my previous social circle. She'd supported me through the Chen Wei drama without trying to manage it for me, and she celebrated my successes without any hidden agenda. "I actually ran into Chen Wei outside," I said casually. "Oh no. Was it awful?" "No, actually. It was closure, I guess. He seems like he's getting help for his issues." "Good for him," Sarah said, with the kind of diplomatic tone that meant she was trying to be supportive without being fake. "Are you okay?" "I'm great," I said, and I meant it completely. He's not my problem anymore. He's not anyone's problem but his own. As it should be. We talked about my research project, my teaching responsibilities, and our plans for the semester. Normal conversation between friends, the kind of easy interaction I'd never had when my emotional energy was constantly drained by Chen Wei's manipulation and drama. That evening, I sat in my graduate student apartment, small but entirely my own, paid for with my assistantship stipend, and reflected on how different this timeline had turned out. In my previous life, I'd been working 2 part-time jobs to pay off debt Chen Wei had helped me accumulate while he built his career with Lin Xiaoyue. Now I was building my own career while he worked night shifts to pay off his own poor choices. The reversal was complete, but it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice, like the natural order of things reasserting itself when manipulation was no longer allowed to distort the balance. My phone buzzed with a message from my parents. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Your father says to remind you that smart, independent women change the world." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks for raising me to choose myself first. It made all the difference." Outside my window, the campus was alive with the energy of a new semester. Students were walking to evening classes, studying in groups, building the kinds of genuine connections that would support them through their academic journeys. I opened my laptop and began preparing for tomorrow's economics seminar, feeling the deep satisfaction of work that mattered and a life that was entirely my own. The past was no longer important. What mattered was that my life was now filled with light, and I had finally learned the most important lesson of all. People who choose themselves aren't selfish. They're free. My wonderful life was just beginning, and this time no one else got to decide how the story would end. My heart was pounding, but not from excitement like it had been in my previous life. This time, I felt the weight of knowledge pressing down on me like a stone. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Chen Wei would suggest we walk closer to the lake for better lighting. Lin Xiaoyue would encourage it, claiming she wanted to capture the perfect romantic moment between us. Then Chen Wei would stage his fall, and I would dive in like the naive fool I once was. "The lake looks beautiful today," Chen Wei said, his voice carrying that false warmth I now recognized as performance. "Should we get out and take some photos?" In my previous life, I'd been thrilled by his suggestion. I'd thought he wanted romantic photos with me, proof of our love to share with the world. How laughable. "Actually, I'm feeling a bit car sick," I said, pressing my hand to my forehead. The winding roads, you know. Maybe we could just stay here for a few minutes. Lin Xiaoyue leaned forward from the back seat, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. Oh, come on, don't be such a spoil sport. Chen Wei drove all this way for you. For me. The lies came so easily to her. Even now, I turned to look at her through the rearview mirror, studying her face with new clarity. She was pretty, I'd give her that, with her perfectly applied makeup and carefully styled hair, but there was something predatory in her smile, something I'd been too trusting to see before. I know he did, I replied calmly. That's why I don't want to ruin the trip by getting sick all over his car. Chen Wei's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in what I once thought was genuine affection. Now I could feel the calculation in his touch, the way he squeezed just a little too tightly, trying to manipulate my emotions through physical contact. Come on, baby, he said, his voice dropping to that persuasive tone that had once made my knees weak. Fresh air will help with the nausea, and I really want to get some pictures with you by the water. In my previous life, I'd melted at those words. I'd thought he was being romantic, wanting to capture our happiness. Now I could see the trap being laid, piece by piece. He needed me by that lake. He needed me to see him fall. He needed my heroic rescue to cement my devotion and guilt me into years of financial support. I really don't feel well, I insisted, keeping my voice weak and apologetic. Maybe just a few more minutes. I'm sure I'll feel better soon. I watched Chen Wei's face in the reflection of the side mirror. A flash of annoyance crossed his features before he forced his expression back to concern. Lin Xiaoyue wasn't as good at hiding her irritation. Oh, fine, she muttered, flopping back in her seat. But we can't stay here all day. Some of us have plans tonight. Plans? I almost laughed. In my previous life, those plans had involved celebrating at dinner while I lay unconscious in the hospital. They'd probably toasted to their successful manipulation, congratulating themselves on how perfectly their scheme had worked. The dashboard clock shifted to 3:52 p.m. In my previous life, I'd already been standing at the lake's edge by now, watching Chen Wei and Lin Xiaoyue pose for photos. I'd been holding the camera, playing photographer for my own betrayal. Actually, I said suddenly, I think I need some real medicine. There's a pharmacy back in town, isn't there? Maybe we should head back. What? Chen Wei's voice cracked slightly. But we just got here. You've been looking forward to this trip all week. Had I? In my previous life? Maybe. But that girl was gone, drowned in the same icy water that had nearly killed her body. I have been looking forward to it, I said, maintaining the lie while planning my escape. But I'd rather cut the trip short than spend it feeling miserable. We can always come back another time when I'm feeling better. Lin Xiaoyue made a sound of disgust. Seriously? We drove 2 hours for this. I'm sorry, I said. Not sorry at all. I didn't plan to get carsick. Chen Wei was gripping the steering wheel now, his knuckles white with tension. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to salvage his plan. The desperation was almost amusing. Look, why don't Lin Xiaoyue and I just take a quick walk around the lake while you rest in the car, he suggested. Get some fresh air, take a few pictures. You don't have to move. Perfect. Let them go alone. Let them execute their little scheme without their intended victim. I was curious to see what would happen when there was no devoted girlfriend to jump into the freezing water. That sounds good, I agreed. I'll just close my eyes for a bit. The quiet will help. Chen Wei and Lin Xiaoyue exchanged a look that I pretended not to see. They were probably wondering if they should proceed without me, but the plan required my presence, my witness, my sacrifice. You know what? Lin Xiaoyue said suddenly. Maybe we should all just go home. This is kind of ruining the mood. No, I said quickly. You two go ahead. Take some pictures. I know how much you both love the lake. The clock read 3:59 p.m. In my previous life, Chen Wei had fallen through the ice at exactly 4:08 p.m. I'd checked the time obsessively during those terrible weeks in the hospital, replaying every moment leading up to the accident. Chen Wei hesitated, clearly torn between abandoning his plan and proceeding without the guarantee of rescue. Finally, his desperation won. "Okay," he said. "We'll be quick. Just yell if you need anything." "I will," I promised, settling back into my seat and closing my eyes. I listened to them get out of the car, their voices carrying on the winter air as they walked toward the lake. In my previous life, I'd been with them, taking photos and laughing at Lin Xiaoyue's jokes. Now I sat in warm safety, counting down the minutes to Chen Wei's planned accident. At 4:05 p.m., I heard Lin Xiaoyue shriek. At 4:06 p.m., I heard a splash and Chen Wei shouting. At 4:07 p.m., I heard Lin Xiaoyue screaming for help. I opened my eyes and looked at the clock. 4:08 p.m. Right on schedule. But this time I wasn't jumping into that water. This time I was reaching for my phone to call emergency services, my voice calm and measured as I reported the accident. This time, let karma handle its own business. Sure enough, someone else, a jogger who'd been running the lake trail, heard the commotion and jumped in to help. By the time I walked calmly to the water's edge, Chen Wei was being pulled from the lake by a stranger who'd risked his own safety for someone who didn't deserve it. Chen Wei was conscious, but shivering violently, his lips blue with cold. Lin Xiaoyue was sobbing, her perfect makeup streaked down her cheeks. They both looked at me with identical expressions of shock and confusion. "Why didn't you come help?" Lin Xiaoyue demanded through her tears. I looked down at Chen Wei, who was staring up at me with something that might have been betrayal in his eyes. How ironic. "I called for help," I said simply. "I'm not a strong swimmer, and jumping in would have just created 2 victims instead of 1. The professionals are on their way." It was logical. It was smart. It was everything I should have done in my previous life, instead of nearly drowning myself for someone who saw me as disposable. In the distance, I could hear the wail of approaching sirens. Chen Wei's planned accident had become a real emergency, and this time I was walking away with dry clothes and a clear conscience. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their professional efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding at the lake's edge. I watched from a safe distance as they assessed Chen Wei's condition, their faces grave as they took his vital signs. "Severe hypothermia," they announced. He needed immediate hospitalization. Lin Xiaoyue hovered nearby, her designer boots slipping on the icy ground as she tried to get closer to the action. "Is he going to be okay?" she kept asking, her voice high and panicked. "Someone needs to call his parents. Someone needs to—" "Mom, please step back," one of the paramedics said firmly. "We need space to work." I found myself studying her performance with detached interest. In my previous life, I'd been too busy drowning and dying to really observe her behavior during the crisis. Now I could see it clearly. Lin Xiaoyue was terrified, but not for Chen Wei's well-being. She was terrified of being associated with the accident, of being held responsible. As they loaded Chen Wei onto a stretcher, his eyes found mine through the crowd of emergency responders. Even through his hypothermic haze, I could see the confusion there, the desperate question he couldn't voice. "Why didn't you save me?" I gave him a small, polite smile and walked closer to the ambulance. "I'll meet you at the hospital," I told him, my voice gentle and concerned for anyone listening. "Don't worry about anything. Just focus on getting better." In my previous life, those words had been a promise that nearly cost me my life. This time they were just words. The ride to the hospital was illuminating. Lin Xiaoyue insisted on coming with me in my car, claiming she was too shaken to drive. But as soon as we were alone, her mask began to slip. "That was so scary," she said. but her tone was more annoyed than frightened. I can't believe he actually fell in. We were just trying to get some cute photos. Accidents happen, I replied neutrally. Ice can be unpredictable. I guess, she muttered, then glanced at me sideways. You were really calm back there. Most girlfriends would have freaked out more. Most girlfriends would have jumped in without thinking. Most girlfriends would have risked their lives for someone who didn't deserve it. But I just smiled and kept driving. At the hospital, the real show began. Chen Wei was rushed into emergency treatment while Lin Xiaoyue and I sat in the waiting room. I watched her fidget with her phone, constantly checking social media and texting people about the crazy accident she'd witnessed. "Oh my God," she said suddenly, looking up from her screen. "People are already posting about it. Someone filmed the rescue." I felt a cold satisfaction wash over me. In my previous life, there had been no witnesses, except the three of us. No social media posts. No evidence of what really happened. This time, there would be a record. This time, people would see that Chen Wei's accident happened while he was taking photos with another woman. "That's unfortunate," I said mildly. "I hope Chen Wei won't be embarrassed by the attention." Lin Xiaoyue's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "Well, it might look strange to people who don't know the whole story. You know, him falling in while taking romantic photos with my roommate instead of his girlfriend." The silence that followed was deafening. Lin Xiaoyue stared at me, her mouth slightly open, clearly trying to process what I'd just said. "What are you trying to say?" she finally asked. "Nothing at all," I replied innocently. "I'm just thinking about how these things look from the outside. People love to gossip about relationships, don't they?" Before Lin Xiaoyue could respond, a doctor appeared in the waiting room. "Family of Chen Wei?" I stood up. "I'm his girlfriend." Lin Xiaoyue remained seated, and I could feel her eyes burning into my back as I approached the doctor. "Mr. Chen is stable," the doctor explained, "but he's developed severe hypothermia. We'll need to keep him for observation for at least 48 hours. The treatment can be expensive without proper insurance coverage. Do you know if he has family insurance or—" "I'm just a college student," I said apologetically. "I don't have access to that kind of money. Perhaps you should contact his parents." In my previous life, I'd immediately offered to cover whatever costs weren't handled by insurance. I'd maxed out my credit cards and borrowed money from my parents to ensure Chen Wei got the best possible care. I'd bankrupted myself for someone who saw me as a walking ATM. The doctor nodded understandingly. "Of course. We'll work with the family to sort out the financial aspects. You can see him briefly if you'd like, but he's still quite disoriented." Chen Wei's hospital room was a mirror image of the one I'd occupied in my previous life, right down to the beeping monitors and sterile smell. But this time, I was the visitor, not the patient. This time, I was walking in on my own two legs, my lungs clear and strong. He looked pale and fragile under the hospital blankets, nothing like the confident manipulator I'd grown to despise. For a moment, I felt an echo of the old sympathy that had once driven me to heroic stupidity. Then I remembered Lin Xiaoyue's cruel laughter at my expense, and the feeling evaporated. "Hey," I said softly, taking the seat beside his bed. "How are you feeling?" His voice was hoarse when he spoke. Cold. So cold. Why didn't you come help me?" There it was, the question that had been burning in his eyes since the accident. In my previous life, he'd never had to ask it, because I'd nearly died proving my devotion. "I'm not a strong swimmer," I said, the same logical excuse I'd given Lin Xiaoyue. "I would have just made things worse. The important thing is that you're safe now." "But I could have died," he whispered, and I could hear the genuine fear in his voice. "If that jogger hadn't been there—" "But he was there," I pointed out. "And you're alive. Sometimes we have to trust that things work out the way they're supposed to." Chen Wei stared at me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. In my previous life, this moment had been filled with his tearful gratitude and my guilt-ridden promises to always be there for him. Now there was just confusion and a growing distance between us. "The doctor mentioned insurance," I continued gently. "You should probably call your parents. They'll want to know what happened." "What about your parents?" he asked. "They've always been so generous." And there it was, the first direct attempt to access my family's money. In my previous life, he'd been more subtle, more manipulative. Desperation was making him clumsy. "My parents barely know you," I said with false surprise. "Why would they pay for your medical bills? That would be really inappropriate." The lie came easily because it was built on truth. My parents had barely known him in my previous life either. They'd only paid because I'd begged them to, because I'd been lying unconscious in the next room, and they'd thought it was the right thing to do. Chenwei's face went through several emotions before settling on something that looked almost like panic. "But we're together. We're a couple." "Of course we are," I agreed. "But that doesn't mean my family is responsible for your medical expenses. I'm sure your parents will handle everything." I stayed for exactly 15 minutes, making appropriate girlfriend noises while carefully avoiding any commitment to financial support. When I left, Chenwei looked more confused than grateful, and Lin Xiaoyue was nowhere to be found. I discovered where she'd gone when I checked my phone in the parking lot. 3 missed calls and a string of panicked text messages. "We need to talk. This is important. Call me back right now. I know what you're thinking, and you're wrong." How laughable. Lin Xiaoyue was panicking, probably realizing that their perfect plan had gone sideways. Chenwei was hospitalized, but not rescued by his devoted girlfriend. There was video evidence of him falling while taking photos with another woman. And most importantly, no one was stepping forward to pay his medical bills. I deleted her messages without responding and drove home to my dorm room. For the first time in what felt like years, I had a quiet evening to myself. Sure enough, the next morning brought exactly what I'd expected. Desperate phone calls from both of them. Chenwei needed someone to bring him clothes and toiletries. Lin Xiaoyue needed to explain the misunderstanding about yesterday. Both of them needed my family's money, though only Chenwei was shameless enough to ask directly. I let all their calls go to voicemail and spent the day studying for my upcoming exams. In my previous life, I'd missed weeks of school sitting by Chenwei's hospital bed. This time, I was going to pass my finals with flying colors. The past was no longer important. What mattered was that I'd finally learned to choose myself first. The hospital called me on the second day of Chenwei's stay, not to update me on his condition, but to discuss payment arrangements. The financial counselor's voice was professionally sympathetic as she explained that Chenwei's insurance would only cover basic care, leaving a substantial balance for the hypothermia treatment. "He's listed you as his emergency contact and primary support person," she said. "He mentioned that you might be able to help with the outstanding charges." In my previous life, that phone call had sent me into a panic. I'd immediately called my parents, begging them to help cover the costs because Chenwei saved my life, and now I need to save his. What a naive fool I'd been. "I'm sorry, but I'm just his girlfriend, not his family," I replied calmly. "I'm a college student with no income. You'd need to speak with his parents about payment arrangements." "Oh." The counselor sounded surprised. "He seemed quite confident that you would be handling this. He's been asking for you specifically, saying it's urgent." "I'm sure it is urgent for him," I said, "but I'm not financially responsible for his medical care. His parents should have been contacted immediately." After hanging up, I sat in my dorm room and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Chenwei called 20 minutes later, his voice weak but demanding. "Baby, why haven't you come to see me today? The hospital says they need payment arrangements, and I told them you'd handle it." "I've been studying," I said truthfully. "Finals are next week, remember? And why would I handle your medical bills? That's what insurance and family are for. The silence on the other end was telling. In my previous life, I'd never questioned the assumption that I would pay. I'd been so grateful that he survived, so guilty about not preventing the accident somehow, that I'd bankrupted myself without hesitation. "What do you mean?" he asked finally. "You know my parents don't have money. Your family has always been generous when I needed help." Always been generous. What an interesting way to phrase repeatedly manipulated into paying for things that weren't their responsibility. "When have my parents ever paid for anything for you?" I asked, with genuine curiosity. "I don't remember them ever even meeting you properly." Another long silence. Chen Wei was clearly struggling to navigate this conversation without his usual emotional manipulation tactics. "Well, not directly," he admitted, "but they've always supported us as a couple. And after what happened at the lake—" "What happened at the lake was an accident," I interrupted. "A tragic accident that occurred while you were taking photos with Lin Xiaoyue. I'm sure the insurance company will handle everything appropriately." "With Lin Xiaoyue?" His voice cracked slightly. "What does that have to do with anything?" How fascinating. He was going to pretend that the optics didn't matter, that there was nothing strange about falling through ice while on a romantic photo session with another woman. "Nothing at all," I said sweetly. "I'm just mentioning it because several people filmed the rescue, and it's already circulating online. You're probably going to get a lot of attention once you're released." The panic in his voice was immediate. "What kind of attention? What are people saying?" "Oh, I haven't really been following it," I lied smoothly. "I've been too focused on my studies. But you know how social media works. People love a dramatic story." In truth, I'd been monitoring the posts carefully. The video of Chen Wei's rescue was gaining traction on several platforms, and the comments were illuminating. People were asking questions about why his girlfriend wasn't in the frame, why he was taking photos with another woman, why the girlfriend had stayed dry while he nearly drowned. "I need to see you," Chen Wei said urgently. "Can you come to the hospital today? We need to talk about this." "I really can't," I said apologetically. "I have 3 final exams this week, and I can't afford to fall behind. I'm sure you understand. Education is so important for our futures." Our futures. As if we had a future together. As if I hadn't already lived through the aftermath of this relationship once before. That afternoon, Lin Xiaoyue finally cornered me. She was waiting outside my dormitory when I returned from the library, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "We need to talk," she said, without preamble. "Hello to you too, Xiaoyue," I replied pleasantly. "How are you holding up after the accident? It must have been traumatic to witness." Her jaw tightened. "Cut the act. I know you know." "Know what?" "About Chen Wei and me. About everything." I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "I'm sorry. I don't understand what you're trying to tell me." Lin Xiaoyue's composure cracked slightly. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but Chen Wei is panicking. He thinks you're going to ruin everything by not helping with the hospital bills." "Ruin what exactly?" I asked. "And why would I pay his medical bills? That seems like a very strange expectation." "Because that's what girlfriends do," she snapped. "They take care of their boyfriends when they're in trouble." How interesting. Lin Xiaoyue was lecturing me about girlfriend duties while actively sleeping with my supposed boyfriend. The hypocrisy was almost artistic in its boldness. "Is that what you think relationships are about?" I asked thoughtfully. "One person taking care of the other financially?" "That's not what I meant," she backtracked quickly. "I meant emotional support. Being there for each other. Like how Chen Wei was emotionally there for me when I chose to stay in the car instead of risking my life for a photo opportunity." Lin Xiaoyue stared at me, clearly trying to figure out exactly how much I knew. and how much I was guessing. The beautiful thing about having lived through this betrayal once before was that I could speak in riddles and watch them torture themselves, trying to decode my meaning. "You're acting really strange," she said finally. "Chen Wei is worried about you." "I'm sure he is," I agreed, "especially since his insurance won't cover all the treatment costs." "So you're just going to let him drown in medical debt?" she demanded. "After he nearly died?" "He did nearly die," I acknowledged. "But fortunately, a kind stranger saved him. And now his family and insurance will handle the financial aspects, just like they would for any other medical emergency." Lin Xiaoyue was clearly frustrated by my refusal to engage with her dramatic framing. "His parents can't afford those bills. You know his family situation." "Then perhaps he should have been more careful around the ice," I said simply. "Or perhaps his close friend, who was there taking photos with him, could contribute to his medical costs, if she's so concerned about his well-being." The color drained from Lin Xiaoyu's face. "I'm just a student, too. I don't have that kind of money." "Then I guess Chen Wei will have to work something out with the hospital's payment plan," I said. "These things have a way of working themselves out." I started walking toward my dormitory entrance, but Lin Xiaoyue grabbed my arm. "Wait. You can't just walk away from this." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. "Actually, I can. And I am. But what about Chen Wei? What about your relationship?" "What about it?" I asked. "Chen Wei had an accident while taking photos with you. He's receiving appropriate medical care. I'm supporting him emotionally while focusing on my education. Everything seems perfectly normal to me." Lin Xiaoyue released my arm, her expression shifting between confusion and fear. "You're really not going to help him?" "I am helping him," I corrected. "I'm respecting his independence and his family's responsibility to handle their own medical emergencies. Isn't that what adults do?" That evening, my phone rang constantly. Chen Wei, Lin Xiaoyue, even some mutual friends who'd apparently been recruited to pressure me. I let them all go to voicemail and spent the evening reviewing my notes for tomorrow's calculus final. In my previous life, I'd spent this same evening in a hospital chair, holding Chen Wei's hand and promising my parents over the phone that I'd pay them back for his medical bills somehow. I'd been so consumed with guilt and fear that I'd barely studied for my finals, leading to grades that cost me scholarship opportunities. This time, I was going to ace every single exam. This time, I was investing in my own future instead of subsidizing someone else's poor choices. The next morning brought a voice message from Chen Wei that perfectly captured his desperation. "Baby, please call me back. I know you're upset about something, but we can work through this. I just need you to talk to the financial counselor today. My parents are being difficult about the money, and I really need your family's help. You know I'd do the same for you." Would he? In my previous life, when I'd been the one lying in a hospital bed, Chen Wei had been planning dinner dates with Lin Xiaoyue. He'd been calculating how long he could milk my gratitude while building his new relationship. I deleted the voicemail and headed to my calculus exam with a clear head and a steady hand. Evil deeds will eventually meet with retribution, and mine was delivered by a steady series of A's on my final transcripts. Chen Wei was discharged from the hospital on a Thursday morning, 3 days after his accident. I knew this not because he told me, but because Lin Xiaoyue posted about it on social media, complete with a photo of herself helping him into a taxi. The caption read, "So grateful our friend is okay after that scary accident. Some people really step up when it matters." The passive-aggressive dig was almost amusing. Lin Xiaoyue was positioning herself as the caring friend, while implying I was somehow negligent. If only she knew how perfectly she was playing into the narrative I wanted to create. I was in the library when Chen Wei finally tracked me down. He looked pale and thinner than before, moving carefully as if his joints still ached from the hypothermia. The dramatic effect was somewhat undermined by the expensive designer jacket he was wearing. clearly a gift from Lin Xiao Yue, since he'd been claiming poverty about his medical bills. "There you are," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I've been trying to reach you for days." "I've been studying," I replied, without looking up from my economics textbook. "Finals week, remember?" "Finals can wait. We need to talk about what happened at the hospital." I finally lifted my eyes to meet his gaze. In my previous life, those dark eyes had been able to manipulate me so easily, making me feel guilty for having boundaries or asking reasonable questions. Now I could see the calculation behind them, the way he was testing different emotional approaches to find my weakness. "What about the hospital?" I asked innocently. "I'm glad you received good care. Modern medicine is amazing, isn't it?" Chen Wei's jaw tightened. "You know what I mean. The bills, the payment arrangements. I told them you'd handle it, and then you just disappeared." "I didn't disappear. I've been here in the library most days. And why would I handle your medical bills? That's not how insurance works." "Because that's what couples do," he said, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself and glanced around the quiet study space. "They support each other. They help each other through difficult times. Like how you supported me when I chose not to jump into a frozen lake?" I asked mildly. The question clearly threw him. "That's different. You made the right choice, staying safe. I'm not upset about that." "Good," I said. "Because it would be strange to be upset with someone for making a smart decision. Just like it would be strange to expect someone else to pay your medical bills when you have family and insurance." Chen Wei leaned forward, switching to what I recognized as his intimate persuasion mode. His voice dropped to a whisper, and he reached across the table to touch my hand. "Baby, I know you're scared about the money, but your parents have always been understanding when we've needed help. Remember when my laptop broke senior year? Or when I needed that down payment for the apartment deposit?" I stared at him, genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? My parents have never given you money for anything." The silence stretched between us as Chen Wei realized his mistake. He'd just referenced events that had only happened in my previous life, times when I'd begged my parents for money to help him, claiming it was for our shared expenses or emergencies. But in this timeline, none of those conversations had taken place. "I meant," he started, then stopped, clearly scrambling to cover his slip. "You meant what?" I pressed gently. "When exactly did my parents help you with a laptop or apartment deposit?" I was thinking of someone else," he said weakly. "I'm still confused from the accident. The hypothermia affected my memory." How convenient. Chen Wei was claiming memory problems to explain away his assumption that my family owed him financial support. The desperation was making him sloppy. "That must be frightening," I said with false sympathy. "Memory issues after medical trauma are serious. Maybe you should see a neurologist. Although I suppose that would be another medical expense." His face flushed red. "Are you mocking me?" "Not at all. I'm genuinely concerned about your health and your finances, since you seem so worried about them. I wouldn't be worried if my girlfriend would act like a girlfriend instead of a stranger." He snapped. There it was, the anger breaking through the manipulation. In my previous life, I'd never seen this side of him, because I'd always given him what he wanted before his patience ran out. "What exactly do you think a girlfriend should do?" I asked, genuinely curious about his answer. "Take care of her boyfriend when he's in trouble. Show some compassion. Stop acting like his problems aren't her problems." Interesting perspective, I mused. "So in your view, a girlfriend is responsible for solving her boyfriend's financial problems?" "When she has the resources and he doesn't, yes," Chen Wei said bluntly. "That's what love means. Sacrifice, support, being there when it matters." "And what does a boyfriend do for his girlfriend in return?" Chen Wei looked annoyed by the question, as if the answer should be obvious. "He loves her. He's loyal to her. He includes her in his life. Like how you included me in your life by taking romantic photos with Lin Xiaoyue at the lake. The words hung in the air between us like a blade. Chen Wei's face went through several expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally, defensive anger. "What are you implying?" he asked carefully. "I'm not implying anything. I'm observing that you fell through the ice while taking photos with another woman. People might find that curious." "Lin Xiaoyue is just a friend. You know that." "Do I?" I asked. "Because she seemed very comfortable directing your photo session, very invested in your well-being, very upset when you got hurt." Chen Wei was sweating now, despite the library's cool temperature. "You're being paranoid. There's nothing going on between us." "I never said there was," I replied calmly. "I'm just noting that the optics are interesting, especially with all the social media attention the rescue is getting." "What social media attention?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the video that had been circulating. Chen Wei's eyes widened as he watched himself fall through the ice, while Lin Xiaoyue screamed dramatically. The comments below were illuminating. "Where's his girlfriend?" read one. "Why is he taking romantic photos with another girl?" asked another. "So's that the girlfriend stayed dry while he nearly drowned," observed a third. "I didn't realize it had been posted online," Chen Wei said weakly. "The internet is forever," I said, tucking my phone away. "But I'm sure it will blow over. These things usually do." Chen Wei stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out exactly what I knew and what I suspected. The beautiful thing about having lived through his betrayal once before was that I could speak in implications and let his guilty conscience fill in the blanks. "Look," he said finally, "I know things have been weird since the accident, but we can get through this. We just need to work together." "I agree completely," I said. "You should work with your family and insurance to handle the medical bills. I'll work on passing my finals, everyone working on their own responsibilities." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Then what did you mean?" Chen Wei's composure finally cracked completely. "I mean, stop playing dumb and help me. I nearly died, and you're acting like it's no big deal. The least you could do is show some concern for my situation instead of hiding behind your textbooks." "I am concerned," I said sincerely. "I'm concerned that you're expecting me to solve problems that aren't mine to solve. I'm concerned that you think a girlfriend's primary value is financial. I'm concerned that you fell through ice while taking photos with another woman and somehow think that's my fault." "It's not your fault," he said quickly. "I never said it was your fault." "Good. Then we agree that you're responsible for your own choices and their consequences." Chen Wei slumped in his chair, looking defeated. "You've changed. Have I? Or have you just never seen me make choices that prioritize my own well-being?" He didn't have an answer for that. I closed my textbook and started packing my bag. "I need to study for my final exam tomorrow. I hope you figure things out with the hospital." "Wait," Chen Wei said desperately. "Can we at least talk about this properly? Maybe over dinner tonight?" "I can't. I have plans." It was true. I had plans to study, to prepare for my future, to invest in myself instead of subsidizing someone else's poor decisions. Plans with who? The possessive edge in his voice was familiar. In my previous life, I'd found his jealousy romantic, proof that he cared about me. Now I recognized it as a control tactic. "Plans with my economics textbook," I said cheerfully. "We're having a very intimate study session." I walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone at the library table with his confusion and desperation. Outside, I took a deep breath of winter air and smiled. In my previous life, this conversation would have ended with me apologizing and promising to call my parents about the medical bills. This time, it had ended with Chen Wei realizing that his usual manipulation tactics no longer worked. Sure enough, My phone started buzzing with texts before I'd even made it back to my dorm. We need to talk more about this. You're being unreasonable. I can't believe you're abandoning me when I need you most. I turned off my phone and spent the evening reviewing supply and demand curves. Some demands, I'd learned, were better left unmet. I should have known Chen Wei wouldn't give up easily. Desperation makes people creative, and by the end of finals week, he'd launched what could only be described as a character assassination campaign. It started with whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Classmates who used to smile and wave began avoiding eye contact. Study groups I'd been part of suddenly became full when I tried to join. The shift was subtle at first, but by Friday afternoon, it was unmistakable. "Hey," my roommate Sarah said when I returned to the dorm after my last exam. "Can we talk?" Sarah was one of the few people who'd remained neutral in the social politics of our dormitory floor. She was practical, studious, and generally minded her own business. If she was asking to talk, something significant had happened. "Of course," I said, settling onto my bed. "What's going on?" "People are saying things about you," she said carefully. "About what happened with Chen Wei at the lake." "What kinds of things?" Sarah looked uncomfortable. "That you abandoned him when he was drowning. That you just sat in the car while he nearly died. That you're being cruel about his medical bills because you're jealous about Lin Xiaoyue." I felt a familiar cold satisfaction wash over me. This was exactly what I'd expected. In my previous life, Chen Wei had never needed to spread rumors because I'd given him everything he wanted. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "That's an interesting story," I said calmly. "What do you think about it?" "I think it sounds like there might be more to the situation than people are saying," Sarah replied diplomatically. "But some of the stories are getting pretty nasty. Chen Wei is telling people you're heartless, that he's seeing your true nature for the first time." "And what about Lin Xiaoyue? What's her version of events?" Sarah's expression darkened. She's been playing the concerned friend angle, talking about how worried she is about both of you, how the trauma has changed you, how she's trying to help Chen Wei understand why you're acting so distant. How predictable. Lin Xiaoyue was positioning herself as the reasonable mediator while simultaneously undermining my reputation. It was actually quite skillfully done. "I appreciate you telling me this," I said. "I'm sure the truth will come out eventually." "Is there something I should know?" Sarah asked gently. "I'm not judging, but if there's context that would help people understand." I considered how much to reveal. In my previous life, I'd never told anyone about Chen Wei's true nature, because I'd been too ashamed of my own naivety. This time, I had the advantage of evidence and emotional distance. "Put it this way," I said. "If your boyfriend nearly drowned while taking romantic photos with another woman, and then expected you to pay his medical bills while claiming he couldn't remember why your family should be financially responsible for his health care, how would you react?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Wait, what? Lin Xiaoyue was taking romantic photos with Chen Wei?" "They were taking some kind of photos together when he fell through the ice. I stayed in the car because I felt car sick. The whole thing was filmed by bystanders and posted online." "I haven't seen the video," Sarah said. "Can you show me?" I pulled out my phone and found the most widely shared version. Sarah watched in silence as Chen Wei and Lin Xiaoyue posed by the lake, laughing and touching each other's hands for the camera. She watched Chen Wei's theatrical fall through the ice, Lin Xiaoyue's panicked screaming, and the eventual rescue by a stranger. "Where are you in this?" Sarah asked, confused. "In the car, where I stayed the entire time." Sarah replayed the video, paying closer attention to the details. This doesn't look like an accident. The way they're positioning themselves, the way she's directing him to stand closer to the edge." "Accidents happen," I said neutrally. "Ice can be unpredictable." But Sarah was smart enough to read between the lines. "Oh my God. You think they staged this? You think Chen Wei was supposed to fall in so you'd rescue him? I didn't answer directly. I think Chen Wei expected me to react differently than I did. And I think the current rumors are his way of processing that disappointment. Sarah stared at the phone screen, then back at me. This is insane. Why would anyone stage something so dangerous? Maybe they didn't expect it to be dangerous. Maybe they thought someone would jump in immediately and pull him out before any real harm occurred. Someone like you. Someone like me. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to process the implications. And the medical bills? He really expected you to pay them? He seemed surprised when I suggested his family and insurance should handle it. Apparently, he was under the impression that my parents were financially responsible for his health care. Sarah struggled to find words. That's completely inappropriate. I thought so too. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Sarah and I both looked down at the screen, where a message from my mother was visible. Honey, I got a very strange call from a girl named Lin Xiaoyue. She said you're having relationship problems and that your boyfriend needs help with medical expenses. Can you call me when you get a chance? I felt my jaw clench. So Lin Xiaoyue had escalated to calling my parents directly. In my previous life, she'd never had to take such direct action because I'd handled the manipulation myself. This was new territory. Excuse me, I said to Sarah. I need to make a phone call. I stepped into the hallway and called my mother back immediately. Hi, Mum. Sweetie, I just had the strangest conversation with your roommate, Lin Xiaoyue. She said your boyfriend Chen Wei was in some kind of accident and that you're not speaking to each other. She seemed to think we should know about his medical situation. Lin Xiaoyue had identified herself as my roommate, not as the woman who'd been taking photos with my boyfriend when he fell through ice. Interesting choice. Lin Xiaoyue isn't my roommate anymore, Mom. She moved out last semester, remember? And yes, Chen Wei had an accident. He fell through ice at a lake and had to be hospitalized for hypothermia. Oh my goodness, that sounds terrible. Are you okay? Were you hurt? I wasn't involved in the accident. I was in the car when it happened. Well, thank goodness you're safe. But this girl seemed very concerned about some kind of financial situation. She mentioned something about medical bills and said you were acting strangely about helping him. I took a deep breath. In my previous life, this conversation had been the beginning of my financial downfall. I'd begged my parents to help, claiming it was an emergency, that Chen Wei's family couldn't afford the treatment, that I owed him because he'd nearly died. Mum, Chen Wei and I are just dating. His medical expenses are his family's responsibility, not ours. I have no idea why Lin Xiaoyue would contact you about his healthcare costs. Well, that's what I told her, my mother said, sounding relieved. I said it seemed inappropriate for us to be involved in another family's medical decisions. She seemed quite upset by that response. I'm sure she was, I said dryly. Honey, is everything all right with this relationship? This whole situation sounds rather dramatic. It's been educational, I replied truthfully. That's not really an answer, sweetheart. I considered how much to tell my parents. They'd been devastated by my choices in my previous life, watching their daughter bankrupt herself for someone who'd never deserved her sacrifice. This time, I wanted them to see the truth from the beginning. Mum, can I ask you something? If your daughter's boyfriend expected you to pay his medical bills after he got hurt during a photo session with another woman, what would you think about that relationship? The silence on the other end was telling. I would think, my mother said carefully, that the young man in question had some very strange ideas about boundaries and responsibility. That's exactly what I think too. And I would wonder why he was taking photos with another woman in the first place. Also a reasonable question. Another pause. Do you need us to come visit? Your father and I could drive up this weekend if you need support dealing with this situation. The offer made my chest tight with emotion. In my previous life, my parents had been confused and hurt by my financial choices, unable to understand why their sensible daughter was bankrupting herself for a boy who seemed to take their generosity for granted. They'd helped because they loved me, but they'd never understood the manipulation I was under. This time, they were offering to come protect me instead of being drawn into supporting my abuser. I'm okay, Mum, really, but I appreciate the offer. Well, if anyone else calls us about medical bills or relationship drama, we'll refer them back to you. Thank you. And honey, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong about this situation, it probably is. After hanging up, I stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling something I hadn't experienced in either lifetime. My parents' unconditional support without the weight of manipulation and guilt. Sarah was waiting when I returned to the room. Everything okay? Lin Xiaoyu called my parents, trying to get them to pay Chen Wei's medical bills. She what? Sarah's voice rose in outrage. That's completely out of line. Who does that? Someone who's desperate, I said. Someone whose plan isn't working the way she expected. What are you going to do about the rumors? I considered the question. In my previous life, I'd never had to deal with this kind of social warfare because I'd been too busy playing the role of devoted girlfriend. But I'd learned something valuable from my past experience. The truth has a way of revealing itself, especially when people are desperate enough to overplay their hands. Nothing, I said finally. I'm going to let them dig their own graves. Sarah looked skeptical. Are you sure? Some of the things people are saying are pretty harsh. Let them talk, I replied. People who matter will see through the rumors eventually, and people who don't see through them weren't worth knowing anyway. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Chen Wei. I know Xiaoyue called your parents. I didn't ask her to do that. Can we please just talk? This has all gotten out of hand. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations I'd learned weren't worth having. Everyone has to pay for their actions, and Chen Wei was about to discover that the price of manipulation was higher than he'd anticipated. The new semester started with a poisoned atmosphere. Chen Wei had apparently spent the winter break refining his victim narrative, because when classes resumed in January, the whispers had evolved into something more organized and malicious. It began with my economics professor, Dr. Zhang, pulling me aside after the first lecture of advanced microeconomics. Miss Li, he said, his expression troubled. I received some concerning information over the break regarding your academic integrity. I wanted to give you an opportunity to address these concerns before they escalate. My blood turned to ice, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of concerns, Professor? A student contacted me, claiming that you've been submitting work that isn't entirely your own. He suggested that your recent strong performance might be artificially enhanced. Chen Wei. Of course, in my previous life, he'd never had to resort to academic sabotage because I'd been too busy bankrupting myself to focus on my studies anyway. But desperate times called for desperate measures. I'm sorry, Professor, but I'm not sure what you mean by artificially enhanced. All my work has been my own. Dr. Zhang looked uncomfortable with the conversation. The student in question seemed to have detailed knowledge of your study habits and suggested that someone else might be completing your assignments. He mentioned that your recent grades were inconsistent with your personal situation. My personal situation? He indicated that you've been dealing with significant emotional distress that should be affecting your academic performance, but your work quality has remained high. He found this suspicious. I stared at Dr. Zhang, genuinely impressed by Chen Wei's calculated cruelty. He was trying to destroy my academic achievements by arguing that good grades were somehow evidence of cheating. The logic was twisted, but clever. If I was supposedly too emotionally devastated to function, how could I be excelling academically? Professor, may I ask who made these accusations? I'd rather not say at this point, but I need to ask you directly. Are you receiving inappropriate assistance with your coursework? No, sir. I am not. I paused, considering my response carefully. Professor, may I show you something? I pulled out my phone and found the video of Chen Wei's lake incident. The student you spoke with, was it Chen Wei? Dr. Zhang's slight flinch confirmed my suspicion. This video was taken in December, I continued, showing him the screen. Chen Wei fell through ice during a photo session with another woman, while I stayed safely in the car. Since then, he's been upset that I haven't paid his medical bills or provided emotional support in the way he expected. Dr. Zhang watched the video with growing concern. I see. And you believe these academic concerns are related to this personal conflict? I believe Chen Wei is confused about why academic performance would improve when someone stops spending their time and energy managing other people's problems. The professor studied my face carefully. That's an interesting perspective. In my experience, Professor, students tend to do better academically when they focus on academics rather than on subsidizing their boyfriend's poor financial planning. Dr. Zhang was quiet for a moment. Miss Li, would you be willing to complete an additional assignment under supervised conditions? It would help clarify any questions about your capabilities. Absolutely, I said immediately. I'd welcome the opportunity to demonstrate my work. That afternoon, I sat in Dr. Zhang's office and completed a comprehensive economic analysis essay in 2 hours. When I finished, he reviewed it carefully while I waited. This is excellent work, he said finally. Sophisticated analysis, original thinking, clear writing, exactly consistent with your recent submissions. Thank you, Professor. I owe you an apology, he continued. I should have been more skeptical of accusations that seemed more personal than academic. I appreciate your thoroughness in investigating, I replied diplomatically. Academic integrity is important. But Chen Wei's sabotage attempts weren't limited to economics. Over the next week, I discovered he'd reached out to 3 other professors, each with a slightly different story designed to undermine my credibility. To my statistics professor, he'd suggested I was cheating on exams by getting advance copies of questions. To my literature professor, he'd claimed I was plagiarizing essays from online sources. To my research methods professor, he'd implied that I was fabricating data for my semester project. Each accusation was just plausible enough to require investigation, but when subjected to scrutiny, they fell apart completely. My exam scores were consistent with my in-class participation. My essays showed original analysis that couldn't be found online. My research data was meticulously documented and verifiable, but the most devastating blow to Chen Wei's credibility came from an unexpected source, Lin Xiaoyue herself. I was in the library researching for my literature paper when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Lin Xiaoyue was talking to 2 classmates I didn't recognize, and her voice carried despite her obvious attempt at discretion. I understand why Chen Wei is upset, she was saying. But some of the things he's been saying about her academic work are just vindictive. What do you mean? One of her companions asked. He's been calling professors and claiming she's cheating, but I've studied with her before. She's genuinely smart. Her good grades aren't suspicious. They're earned. I froze, hardly believing what I was hearing. Lin Xiaoyue was defending my academic integrity. But I thought you 2 were friends, the second classmate asked. We were roommates freshman year, Lin Xiaoyue corrected. And yes, we're still friends. That's why this whole situation is so frustrating. Chen Wei is making me choose sides in a conflict that didn't need to exist. Choose sides how? Lin Xiaoyue sighed. He wants me to back up his stories about her being cruel and heartless. But honestly, I was there when he fell through the ice. She made the smart choice, staying in the car. If she'd jumped in, we might have had 2 drowning victims instead of 1. My hands tightened on my textbook. Lin Xiaoyue was rewriting history, but in a way that actually supported my version of events. "So you think she was right not to help him?" the first classmate asked. "I think she was practical, and I think Chen Wei expected her to be his personal ATM for the medical bills, which is completely unreasonable. They're college students, not married couples with shared finances." I couldn't see Lin Xiaoyue's face from my position, but her voice sounded genuinely frustrated. "The whole thing has gotten out of hand. Chen Wei is so angry about the money situation that he's trying to destroy her reputation, and it's ugly." "Are they still together?" "I don't think so. At least I hope not. This level of vindictiveness isn't healthy for either of them." After her companions left, I approached Lin Xiaoyue's table. She looked up with surprise that quickly shifted to wariness. "I couldn't help overhearing," I said quietly. "Thank you for being honest about what happened at the lake." Lin Xiaoyue's expression was complicated: guilt, defiance, and something that might have been regret. "I was just telling the truth. Not everyone has been doing that lately." She looked down at her books. "Chen Wei he's not handling this well." "No, he's not." We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. In my previous life, Lin Xiaoyue had been my enemy, the woman who'd stolen my boyfriend and laughed at my naivety. But in this timeline, where I'd refused to play the role of victim, the dynamics were completely different. "For what it's worth," she said finally, "I told him to stop calling your professors. It's gone too far." "I appreciate that. And I'm sorry about my call to your parents. Chen Wei asked me to do it, and I thought it might help somehow, but it was inappropriate." I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation, but she just looked tired and stressed, like someone who'd gotten in deeper than she'd intended. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Lin Xiaoyue was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm starting to see a side of Chen Wei that I don't particularly like, and because you don't deserve to have your academic reputation destroyed over relationship drama." That evening, Dr. Zhang sent me an email confirming that all academic integrity concerns had been resolved and apologizing for the inconvenience. He also mentioned that the student who'd made the accusations had been advised that further false reports could result in disciplinary action. I forwarded the email to my parents with a brief note. "Everything resolved. The truth has a way of coming out." My mother called immediately. "Honey, what kind of academic integrity concerns? What happened?" I explained Chen Wei's attempts to sabotage my grades by claiming I was cheating. "He tried to get you in trouble with your professors?" My mother's voice was sharp with outrage. "Over medical bills he thinks we should pay." "It appears so. That young man has serious problems," my father's voice added from the background. He'd apparently joined the call on speaker. "The important thing is that my professors investigated and found his claims baseless," I said. "My academic record is intact." "Well, I should hope so," my mother said. "You've worked too hard to let some vindictive boy destroy your achievements." After hanging up, I sat in my dorm room and reflected on how different this experience was from my previous life. In that timeline, I'd never even reached this point because I'd been too busy playing nurse and ATM to focus on my studies. I'd graduated with mediocre grades and limited opportunities, too damaged by Chen Wei's emotional manipulation to advocate for myself. This time, I was not only excelling academically, but also learning to defend myself against sabotage attempts. This time, even Lin Xiaoyue was inadvertently becoming my ally by telling the truth about Chen Wei's vindictive behavior. My phone buzzed with a text from Chen Wei. "I heard Zhang talk to you. I hope you explained the situation properly." I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. The days ahead would be different from my previous life. This time, I was building my future instead of subsidizing someone else's dysfunction. And apparently, even his mistress was starting to see him clearly. Chen Wei's academic sabotage had backfired spectacularly, but that didn't stop him from escalating to social warfare. By February, he'd apparently decided that if he couldn't destroy my grades, he would destroy my reputation among our mutual friends. The campaign was sophisticated in its pettiness. Chen Wei positioned himself as the wounded victim of a cold, calculating girlfriend who had abandoned him in his time of greatest need. He told stories about my sudden personality change after his accident, painting me as someone who had become cruel and heartless, seemingly overnight. "She used to be so caring," I overheard him telling a group at the student center. "But ever since the lake incident, it's like she's a different person. I nearly died, and she acts like it's no big deal." The story had emotional appeal because it contained just enough truth to be believable. I had changed after the lake incident. I was acting differently toward him. The part he conveniently omitted was why. But Chen Wei's mistake was underestimating our mutual friend's intelligence and overestimating their loyalty to him. The first crack in his narrative came from Zhang Lei, a classmate who'd been in our study group since sophomore year. Zhang Lei was quiet and observant, the kind of person who noticed details others missed. "Hey," he said, approaching me after our advanced statistics lecture. "Can I ask you something privately?" We walked to a quiet corner of the hallway, and Zhang Lei glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard. "Chen Wei has been telling some interesting stories about what happened between you two," he said carefully. "But I've been thinking about the timeline, and some things don't add up." "What do you mean?" "Well, he's been saying that you changed after his accident, that you became cold and unsupportive. But I remember you mentioning weeks before the accident that you were feeling stressed about your relationship." I had mentioned that? In my previous life, I'd never voiced any concerns about Chen Wei to our friends, because I'd been too committed to maintaining the perfect girlfriend facade. "I don't remember saying that," I said honestly. "It was during study group in November. You seemed distracted, and when someone asked if everything was okay, you said you were re-evaluating some priorities in your personal life. We all assumed it was about career stuff, but now..." Zhang Lei was sharp enough to piece together implications without needing explicit confirmation. "Now you're wondering if there were relationship problems before the accident," I said. "I'm wondering if Chen Wei's version of events is complete," he replied diplomatically. That same day, I discovered that Chen Wei had made a critical error in his social manipulation campaign. He'd tried to recruit people who had first-hand knowledge of his character. Li Mei, a girl from our economics study group, cornered me after class with barely contained indignation. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Chen Wei approached me last week, asking me to talk sense into you about supporting him financially. He wanted me to convince you that girlfriends should help their boyfriends in emergencies." "What did you tell him?" "I told him he was insane," Li Mei said bluntly. "But then he started giving me this whole sob story about how you'd become heartless after his accident, how you'd abandoned him when he needed you most. And then I remembered that Chen Wei borrowed 300 yuan from me last semester for textbooks and never paid it back. So I asked him if he'd be paying me back before asking his girlfriend for medical bill money." I couldn't help but smile. "How did he respond to that?" "He said his situation was different, that his medical bills were an emergency, while my loan was just between friends. So I told him that if he couldn't pay back 300 yuan, maybe he should reconsider his financial priorities before taking on additional debt." Li Mei wasn't the only one with stories about Chen Wei's casual relationship with other people's money. As his social campaign intensified, more details about his character began surfacing. Wang Jun, who'd been in our dormitory freshman year, mentioned that Chen Wei had borrowed his laptop for one night and kept it for 3 weeks without asking. Lin Hao recalled lending Chen Wei money for lunch multiple times, with promises of repayment that never materialized. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, the group chat for our economics study group. I wasn't aware the conversation was happening until Li Mei showed me her phone. Someone had started a thread about Chen Wei's behavior, and the messages were illuminating. Has anyone else noticed that Chen Wei always has money for going out, but never has money when bills come? Read one message. Remember when he forgot his wallet at dinner, and we all had to cover him? Added another. And then he ordered the most expensive thing on the menu? Replied a third. Wait, is this why he's been telling everyone his girlfriend should pay his medical bills? He told me she was being cruel for not helping him. But honestly, they're not even engaged. Why would her family pay his hospital costs? That's weird. My boyfriend would never expect my parents to pay for his medical treatment. Did you guys see the video of his accident? He was taking photos with Lin Xiaoyue when it happened. Where was his girlfriend? She was smart enough to stay in the car instead of getting hypothermia. Honestly, good for her. I stared at the messages, feeling something close to vindication. In my previous life, I'd been isolated and confused, with no support system to help me see Chen Wei's manipulation clearly. This time, our friends were connecting the dots themselves. The conversation continued for several more messages, with people sharing increasingly unflattering observations about Chen Wei's character. By the end of the thread, the consensus was clear. Chen Wei had a pattern of expecting others to subsidize his lifestyle, and his current victim narrative was just an extension of that behavior. But Chen Wei wasn't giving up. When his attempts to rally our mutual friends failed, he escalated to social media. He posted a long, emotional status update about the pain of being abandoned by someone he loved, about learning that people aren't who you think they are, about the cruelty of fair-weather friends. He didn't mention my name directly, but the context was clear to anyone who knew us. The post was carefully crafted for maximum sympathy, full of vague phrases about betrayal and disappointment that invited people to fill in their own assumptions. It was the kind of manipulative emotional performance that had worked so well on me in my previous life. But this time, I had allies. Lin Xiaoyue, of all people, was the first to respond. Her comment was brief but devastating. Some people expect their accidents to be other people's emergencies. Zhang Lei added, maybe focus on getting better instead of social media drama? Li Mei was more direct. Pay back the money you borrowed before complaining about other people's generosity. Within hours, Chen Wei's sympathy-seeking post had become a referendum on his own character. People began sharing their own experiences with his financial irresponsibility, his casual disregard for others' boundaries, his tendency to expect support while offering none in return. The post that was meant to isolate me had instead exposed him. Chen Wei deleted the entire thread that evening, but the damage was done. Screenshots had been taken, conversations had been started, and people's opinions had crystallized. My phone buzzed with a message from him. I can't believe you turned everyone against me. I stared at the text, genuinely puzzled by his logic. How had I turned anyone against him? I'd said nothing publicly about our relationship, made no accusations, shared no private details. I'd simply let his own actions speak for themselves. I deleted the message without responding. The next day brought an unexpected development. Chen Wei's closest friend, Ma Dong, asked to speak with me privately. Look, he said, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Okay. Chen Wei has been saying that you knew about his feelings for Lin Xiaoyue, and that you're being vindictive because you're jealous. Is that true? I studied Ma Dong's face. He'd been Chen Wei's friend since high school, someone who'd stood by him through various dramas and conflicts. If even Ma Dong was questioning the narrative, Chen Wei's support system was crumbling. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think Chen Wei has always been attracted to drama, and I think he expected you to play a role in his drama that you refused to play." "That's a very diplomatic way to put it." Ma Dong sighed. "He's my friend, and I want to be loyal. But some of the things he's been saying don't make sense, and some of the things other people are saying about his behavior, they do make sense." "I appreciate your honesty. Can I ask you something else? Do you think he actually cares about Lin Xiaoyue? Or is this just about having drama in his life?" It was a perceptive question. In my previous life, I'd been so focused on my own pain that I'd never really considered Chen Wei's motivations beyond wanting to hurt me. But from this distance, with this perspective, I could see a pattern of behavior that had less to do with genuine emotion and more to do with enjoying chaos and attention. "I think Chen Wei enjoys being the center of dramatic situations," I said carefully. "Whether that's compatible with actually caring about another person, that's not for me to judge." Ma Dong nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too." That evening, I sat in my dorm room, reviewing notes for an upcoming exam, and reflected on how different this social warfare had played out compared to my previous life. Instead of being isolated and friendless, I'd discovered that I had more support than I'd realized. Instead of being seen as cruel and heartless, I was being seen as practical and self-respecting. Chen Wei's attempt to destroy my reputation had instead revealed his own character to everyone around us. Sure enough, by the end of the week, Chen Wei had largely disappeared from our social circles. People still spoke to him when necessary, but the casual invitations to study groups and social events had dried up. His victim narrative had collapsed under scrutiny, leaving him more isolated than he'd intended to make me. As my previous life had taught me, people who lack clarity of mind should be kept at a distance. And apparently, our friends had reached the same conclusion. By March, Chen Wei's financial situation had become critical. Without my family's money propping up his lifestyle, and with his social circle largely abandoning him, the house of cards that was his financial planning began to collapse in spectacular fashion. I learned about his crisis not from Chen Wei himself, but from Lin Xiaoyue, who appeared outside my economics lecture, looking haggard and desperate. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Do we?" "It's about Chen Wei. The situation is getting serious." I studied her appearance. Gone was the perfectly styled hair and carefully applied makeup. Lin Xiaoyue looked like she'd been crying, and her designer clothes seemed rumpled, as if she'd been wearing them for days. "What kind of serious?" "He can't pay his rent or his credit card bills. The hospital is threatening to send his medical debt to collections, and he's been asking me for money." "And I don't have the kind of money he needs," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I'm a student too. I work part-time at a coffee shop. I can't cover thousands of yuan in debt." I felt that familiar, cold satisfaction, but kept my expression neutral. "That sounds like a difficult situation for both of you." "He thinks you're punishing him on purpose," Lin Xiaoyue continued. "He keeps saying that if you would just talk to your parents, they would help like they always have." "Like they always have," I repeated. "When exactly have my parents helped Chen Wei financially?" Lin Xiaoyue's expression faltered. He mentioned that your family had been generous in the past, when he needed help with school expenses and things like that." "My parents have never given Chen Wei money for anything," I said calmly. "I think there might be some confusion about our family's involvement in his financial planning." The silence stretched between us as Lin Xiaoyue processed this information. I could see her trying to reconcile Chen Wei's claims with my response. "But he seemed so confident that they would help with the medical bills," she said finally. "Confident based on what? Based on... I don't know. He just kept saying that your family understood their responsibility to support your relationship." "Their responsibility. The phrasing was illuminating. Chen Wei had apparently built his entire financial strategy around the assumption that my parents owed him something, without ever actually establishing that expectation with them. "Lin Xiaoyue," I said gently, "I think Chen Wei may have misled you about the nature of his relationship with my family." Her face crumpled slightly. "Oh God, this is such a mess." "What's a mess?" "All of it. The money situation, the rumors, the way everyone is treating him now. I didn't realize it would get this bad." I waited for her to continue, genuinely curious about her perspective on the situation. "When we planned the lake thing," she said quietly, "it was supposed to be harmless. Just a way to make you appreciate him more, to make you feel like you owed him something. But then he actually got hurt, and you didn't react the way we expected, and everything just spiraled." There it was. The confession I'd been waiting for since December. In my previous life, I'd never gotten confirmation that the accident was staged. I'd only pieced it together from hints and implications. But now Lin Xiaoyue was admitting it directly. "You planned for him to fall through the ice?" "Not really fall through," she said quickly. "Just slip a little, get wet and cold, so you'd have to take care of him. But the ice was thinner than we thought, and he went all the way under, and it became a real emergency. And you expected me to jump in and save him?" "Yes." Lin Xiaoyue's voice was barely above a whisper. "You were supposed to be the hero who rescued him, and then he'd be so grateful, and you'd feel so important, and it would bring you closer together. Closer together so I'd be more willing to pay his bills?" Lin Xiaoyue flinched. "It wasn't supposed to be about money." "Not entirely. Chen Wei really did care about you, in his way. But he had some financial pressures, and he thought if you felt more emotionally invested in the relationship, I'd be more financially invested too. Something like that." I stared at her, this woman who'd helped orchestrate my near death in my previous life, and felt something unexpected. Pity. Lin Xiaoyue looked genuinely remorseful, but more than that, she looked trapped by the consequences of choices she'd made without fully understanding their implications. "And now?" I asked. "Now Chen Wei is desperate. He owes money to the hospital, to credit card companies, to friends who lent him cash. He can't afford his rent next month, and he's convinced that you're deliberately withholding help just to punish him. What do you think I should do about that?" Lin Xiaoyue looked at me with something that might have been hope. "Maybe you could talk to your parents, explain that it's an emergency. Chen Wei really is in trouble." "Lin Xiaoyue," I said carefully, "why should my parents pay for the consequences of a scheme you and Chen Wei planned to manipulate me?" The question hung in the air between us. Lin Xiaoyue's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. We didn't think about it like that." "How did you think about it?" "We thought it would work out. We thought you'd save him, and then you'd feel good about yourself, and everyone would be happy. Everyone except me, who would have nearly died from hypothermia." Lin Xiaoyue's face went white. "We didn't think you'd get hurt. We thought you were a strong swimmer." "I'm not a strong swimmer. I never have been. If I'd jumped into that water, I probably would have drowned trying to save Chen Wei." The full implications of their plan seemed to hit Lin Xiaoyue for the first time. She sat down heavily on a nearby bench, her hands shaking. "Oh my God," she whispered. "We could have killed you." "Yes," I said simply. "You could have." We sat in silence for several minutes. Lin Xiaoyue stared at her hands, while I watched students walking between buildings, living their normal lives without the weight of near-death experiences and betrayal. "What Chen Wei is going through now," I said finally. "The financial pressure, the social isolation, the consequences of poor choices, that's what I went through in my previous relationship with him. Except I nearly died for the privilege." Lin Xiaoyue looked up at me with confusion. Your previous relationship? I realized I'd spoken without thinking, referencing my past life in a way that made no sense to her. I meant, that's what would have happened if I'd played the role you expected me to play. I would have bankrupted myself taking care of someone who saw me as a resource rather than a person. Is that really how you think Chen Wei sees you? How else should I interpret a plan designed to make me feel indebted to him so I'd be more willing to pay his bills? Lin Xiaoyue had no answer for that. What will you do now? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. Chen Wei keeps asking me to convince you to help, but I can see now that what we did was wrong. Really wrong? And what about your relationship with him? Lin Xiaoyue laughed bitterly. What relationship? Chen Wei doesn't care about me. He cares about solving his financial problems. When I couldn't magically produce thousands of yuan to help him, he started treating me the same way he's been treating you. With anger and manipulation? With anger and manipulation, she confirmed. Turns out that when Chen Wei is desperate, everyone becomes a potential resource to be exploited. That evening my phone rang. Chen Wei's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, I answered. Finally, he said, relief evident in his voice. I was starting to think you'd blocked my number. What do you want, Chen Wei? I want to talk, in person. There are things we need to discuss. What kind of things? Our relationship, my situation, the way you've been treating me since the accident. You mean since I found out you staged the accident to manipulate me into feeling indebted to you? The silence on the other end was telling. Lin Xiaoyue told me about your conversation, I continued, about how the lake incident was planned to make me feel like I owed you something. It wasn't like that, Chen Wei said quickly. She's exaggerating. She's upset because I've been honest about our financial situation. Our financial situation? Mine and yours. We're supposed to be a team, but you've been acting like my problems aren't your problems. Your problems aren't my problems, I said calmly. Your debt, your poor financial planning, your inability to pay rent, those are your problems. But we're together, he protested. We're supposed to support each other. Were we together when you were planning the lake incident with Lin Xiaoyue? Were we supporting each other then? Another long silence. I want to see you, Chen Wei said finally, face to face. There are things I need to explain. I thought about my previous life, about the months I'd spent believing his explanations, accepting his justifications, funding his lifestyle while my own future crumbled. This time, I had the luxury of knowing exactly where those conversations led. No, I said simply. No. No, I don't want to see you. No, I don't want to hear your explanations. No, I'm not going to solve your financial problems. You can't just abandon me, Chen Wei said, desperation creeping into his voice. After everything we've been through together. Everything we've been through together was you manipulating me and me enabling it, I replied. I'm choosing to stop that pattern. But I could lose my apartment. I could get kicked out of school if I can't pay my debts. Then maybe you should have thought about those consequences before staging a dangerous accident to manipulate your girlfriend into paying your bills. I hung up before he could respond. The next morning, I learned that Chen Wei had been evicted from his apartment for non-payment of rent. Ma Dong mentioned it in passing, noting that Chen Wei had asked several friends for temporary housing and been turned down by all of them. Lin Xiaoyue had apparently broken up with him the same day, tired of being asked to solve financial problems she'd helped create. Chen Wei was learning the same lesson I'd learned in my previous life. When you treat people as resources rather than humans, you eventually find yourself alone and resource poor. The difference was that this time, he was learning it without taking me down with him.